you directions.
Yeah.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really excited that we get to talk about this critical aspect of partner management and how do we have others engage and help us in delivering on student success for youth and agriculture programs. And so I'm going to get out of the way. You can talk to me all the time. I'm excited to have Josh Rusk, the Executive Director of the National FFA Alumni and a former agriculture teacher. Josh from North Carolina, right?
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, I apologize. Didn't mean to move you south of the Mason-Dixon. So from Wisconsin, and the cool thing is, Josh, just so you know, and I didn't know I was going to do this, but this morning they have in their hands some examples from Sauk Perry, from Troy Talford, and from Lodi, from Glenda Cook, and some from Prairie Farm, which I think is also Wisconsin. Yeah, Prairie Farm, Emma Bartz on engaging with partners. So we were talking about how do you even reach out and solicit. Just so you know, they got some handouts that went across to Wisconsin Ag Teacher Listserv that we shared with.
Perfect.
Okay, it's all you, buddy.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me in this morning. I also have with me our education specialist for alumni, Alli Ellis, former state staff from Tennessee. So I'm going to be with you for a short bit, and then she's going to kind of take over as I've got another meeting I've got to run to. But we wanted to take some time this morning to talk to you a little bit about how we get volunteers involved and the importance of volunteers in the program. As Dr. Foster said, I taught in Green Bay, Wisconsin, or right outside of Green Bay, Wisconsin for 12 years before coming to National FFA 2.5 years ago. And I had the luxury of starting my very first teaching position after an individual who'd been there for 38 years. And so walking in as a brand new teacher after someone who had been very established and had a pretty good, a great program going, the real advantage to that was also had the largest alumni in the nation. Currently, we have about 618 life members there, and then a total of about 625 total members in the alumni at Denmark, Wisconsin. And so right away, I had that advantage of having a ton of community support and a ton of community help. And so getting them involved in the program and helping out wherever I needed them was really pretty easy to do getting started. But as I was looking through some of your questions that you had posted on the class page there, one of the ones was what were some challenges? And I could also say that as a new teacher, that was also a big challenge, was having all of those community members involved. And mainly because, like I said, I followed an individual that had been there for 38 years. And so they were very accustomed to what he did and the way he did it. And they were his students. And so when we came in and started, learned very quickly that I could make a few changes, but I couldn't make major changes that first year because I needed to get to know the community and needed to get to know the program. But then we were able to gradually make changes, and it was just really how did we have those conversations about why changes were being made and not that we were just going to make changes. And so it was really important for me to learn that they were there to help, but they just needed to understand why I was going to be doing the things that I was. Sometimes the school district mandated that I make changes, and those were changes that we didn't necessarily couldn't easily share with them because it might be because he had been doing it the same way for so long. The school district just had said, we're going to make mandatory changes once he retires. But it was really how did we make those gradual changes in the program to fit my needs and also to fit the changing needs of the students. So the really cool thing about having alumni and volunteers in the program is it's a great way to take some of the workload off of your plate. And I'll admit, when I first started, I was straight out of college, first teaching job, single. I could spend 18 hours a day if I needed to at the school, and it wasn't a big deal. I always say, though, that at the end of my first year, I met my now wife. About the end of my second school year of teaching, we were married. And midway through my third year of teaching, I had a daughter at home. And so very quickly, my life changed in regards to the responsibilities and expectations. And that was a little bit of a challenge for the community, because I'd been after an individual whose kids were my age. He was married, but she was very familiar with him spending every hour of the day at the building as well. So then when my life responsibilities started changing and those things that required extra attention outside of the building changed, we had to have that conversation. And it really was then me bringing him in saying, hey, I can't go this weekend to this conference. Could you chaperone students? It was, I can't do every evening, or I'm going to be here, but I can't do this all by myself. So how can you come in and help me proofread proficiency awards or fill out state degree applications? And so it was really starting to think about what are the things that we do on a daily basis that we don't have to do, that someone else could do. So those things that are part of the job, but yet aren't a requirement that has to be a teacher that does them. So chaperoning after, you might be at a meeting and having someone chaperone an activity afterwards, or helping chaperone national convention. I took on average 18 students a year to national convention. We would drive 2 vans, and I would have an alumni member who would help chaperone that event for me. Personally, as I started, I've got 2 kids now. I've had alumni members who have babysat my kids so that I could be gone on a Saturday to an FFA event. Or I had one family that would come along, and the one thing they came for was not only to drive students, but then when the activity was going on, they were my babysitters at the FFA activity. And so my kids came along with me, and then they would take care of the kids while the students and I were off doing what we needed to be doing. So it's really thinking about what are some things that we do that we could give up and let a volunteer or a community member be a part of that. One of the things that we have found is that we've put together, and I really wish after 12 years I would have had it, is how do you find out what those community members are interested in doing? And so we've created a volunteer inventory resource that we give out to all community members, and we encourage teachers to give out to them. And what it does is it says, what is my interest? What are my expertise? I always use the example, I was in Kansas City yesterday meeting with AFA, and one of the things we talked about was volunteers and what is our goal of getting alumni members into the Ag Ed program. And we say, it's really about getting them to give back through their use of time, talents, and financial resources. And so my best example of giving of talents is I had a dairy judging team that placed second at national convention 2 years ago, and I didn't practice with them a single time. The only time I ever saw them as a group is when I picked them up to take them to the regional contest, picked them up again to take them to the state contest, and then to get them to national convention. Instead, growing up, I actually grew up in the south central part of Kansas on a large wheat, beef, and sheep farm, but ended up teaching in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and knew nothing about dairy cattle other than what I'd learned out of a textbook or as a part-time job. So instead, I reached out to an individual who worked for an AI company classifying dairy cattle. So every day of his life, this is what he did, and said, hey, you would be a much better coach for my dairy judging team than I could ever be. And so would you be interested? And he, that's his passion. So he said, definitely. I gave him students' names and their contact information. He scheduled every practice with them. He got them to show up on a Saturday morning. I was at home with my kids, or I was with the horse judging team. And he took care of everything. And he just used what it's his passion, is what he loved to do. And it's what he did every day. So I allowed him to use his expertise to coach that team. So I didn't have to try to just do the book knowledge and get them a little ways. Instead, I could give him to him, and he could take them the full route that he needed in order to get them to that national contest. So it's really about, our focus on alumni is getting that community support into the program for you. and how do we help them understand that what their role is in the community. And it's not that they're your boss. You're their boss. You are the program. We identified as the general manager of the Ag Ed program. And so you determine the route and the direction of the program, and then where do you need assistance within that program. Allie, do you have anything?
I would like to say I did come from a suburban area when I was teaching. I taught for 5 years just north of Nashville. And I saw one of the questions that was submitted was about urban agriculture and how do you get people involved. And it's just about making sure that they feel invested and are doing what they like to do. So if you think about if you have a mom that loves to bake, then let them bring the desserts for a chapter meeting. I was also 21 when I started teaching, so I wasn't allowed to drive a van or get a rental car until I was 25. So for 4 years, I had to rely on alumni members to help drive all the students to all the competitions. So it's just whatever they're interested in. Some don't want to travel with you, and that's fine, but maybe they can bring the hot dogs for the tailgate party or whatever it may be. So just helping them find a way to feel like they're making a difference. Chili cook-offs are great because everyone loves to compete, and that's a way that they can do that and then also feed a lot of people. But just to think about all the different ways, it doesn't just have to be fundraising. We always had a great greenhouse sale and didn't really need alumni to fundraise, but I needed them for those other things. We also, at my chapter when I was teaching, started an alumni chapter, so I wasn't the biggest one in the state by far. We were just getting started, so I would say when you're just getting started with an alumni chapter, just to make sure that you're trying to involve all the parents, not just one particular one. And it was actually a former chapter president that got it started, so making sure that you do include all the different generations. It can be recent graduates, it can be parents, but not limiting yourself to a certain age demographic or former members. It can be anyone that can be involved in your alumni chapter.
I think the other important thing to identify is we always say, we call them FFA alumni, but I always try to remind the alumni members as we meet with them is they're really Ag Ed alumni. Or as we really use the term, Ag Ed volunteers. And so how can you use them within your classroom even? Being that content guest speaker, I always use the example, about 7 years into teaching, I was recruited by another school district and moved and went to a school that, again, from having the largest alumni to one that had a really small alumni. But we had a huge groundswell of support for the program. And we used to say that to be an alumni member, you had to pay individual dues. And now we've moved to what we call the affiliation program, where the program pays one flat fee, or can pay. It's up to the program on how they do it. One flat fee, and then they can put as many people on their roster and give them the benefits of being an alumni member and that support and the educational resources for that flat fee instead of each individual. So instead of having to go out and say, well, for $20 so you can be an alumni member, we now say, you don't owe me anything. Your time is more valuable than your money, and the time that you can give me, and we'll give you the benefits. And so what we started doing is we would recruit every parent to come in and say, what are you interested in doing, or where can you help? And it might be only one event per year. But that was one more event that I had someone helping out with than I would have if I would have never even asked. And I always say that, the answer is always no if you don't ask. You're never going to get a yes until you ask. And so a lot of times we make a lot of excuses that, well, this person's always so busy. They're in this, and this, and they can't because they work all the time, or they've got a full-time job, or they're a farmer. And really what we do is we set ourselves up. We just make excuses for them without even asking them. And I would challenge you to think about, look at the people who are really involved, and even in your classroom. If you look at someone who's really involved in every program or every extracurricular even if you ask them, probably aren't going to, because they've not committed to doing anything for anyone else. And so a lot of times we look at, well, they're so busy doing this, they can't have time, so let's go after the ones that aren't doing anything, and you're probably going to get a no from them. But if you just let them know, how can they be a part, where do they feel like they can fit, and where do you need them, I think is really beneficial. We used, I always said, I'd spend 3 weeks planting plugs in my greenhouse in the spring to get ready to get the greenhouse ready. It takes about 2 days to teach students how to plant plugs in the proper way to transplant, but I would spend another 2.5 weeks just getting everything done. And then a good friend of mine who I sent the video to Dr. Foster from another one from Wisconsin said, you know what, we do 2 days, but we bring in we go to the senior citizen home, and we get ladies that come in, and they'll work right alongside my students for 2 days. And then we go back to the classroom, and guess who stays in the greenhouse and finishes planting plugs for the next 2 days? Those little ladies who are looking for community activities, they bring their coffee with them, and they'll sit out in the greenhouse and just talk all day while planting plugs. And I've now only had to spend 2 days instead of 3 weeks. And so it's just kind of thinking about how can you involve people that maybe we typically wouldn't think of. So I did want to provide some opportunity for specific questions that anyone may have.
Absolutely. So guys, let's set this up. I'll try to make it where it works out the way it should. So we'll put it here, and then okay. Are we lined up if we stand here? No, let me just come back here. How far back? Okay, who's first up? Pose the question, Tyler. Who's first up? Excellent. Cheyenne's first, and let's go ahead and have whoever's on deck standing in the middle lane.
Hi, I'm Cheyenne. I'm a junior in agriculture and extension education. My question to you is, how do you get people interested in the alumni if they either had a bad experience in their FFA chapter, whether they didn't get along with their advisor, just stuff like that? How do you get them interested in helping in a program that didn't really influence them?
That's a great question. I really think, a lot of times we've in the past have always tried to go after for a specific event or a specific activity. And what we now try to identify is just go and ask them, again, with our resource inventory, it may be something that they can do from home. And so an example is that on the sheet, it talks about data entry. So maybe it's for your fruit sale, things that you can send to them where they don't even have to come. But it's just letting them know that where I think the big thing is instead of recruiting for specific events or specific activities, is recruit to, I just am looking for volunteers. Where would you be comfortable, or what would you be interested in helping out with? And letting them know that I think the other important thing is that the value of their time and the impact that it's making on your program is really key and is really critical. The IRS identifies the value of a volunteer's time to be, I just drew blank.
Over $22.
$23.07 is the value. If you had to pay someone to do the job of a volunteer, it would cost you at the national average $23.07 per hour. And so you think about people understanding the value of their time when they donate it. If they're donating 2 hours of their time, that's nearly $50 of impact that they've provided to your program. And so how do we share that with them to let them know that it's not just to do the work, but the real impact that you're making and the time that they're providing to the services to the students.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Evelyn Zaleski. I am an Ag Extension Education major. I'm a senior this year. My question is pertaining to volunteers that need to get their clearances done. What do you do if their clearances aren't going through? How do you manage that uncomfortable phone call or email? And then what would you do if someone who wants to help out doesn't have the money to pay for the clearances that they may need?
Those are some great questions. I'm going to let Allie answer those because Allie's actually managing our volunteer management program, which encompasses some of those things and really looks at how do we make sure that getting volunteers in our program, that they're actually coming in trained and that they're having the resources that they need.
All right. So volunteers that you have at your school, it all depends on the school system. So some schools will require them to have fingerprinting and background checks and that sort of thing. And some school systems, if they do require that, will actually let them be paid for by the school system. Now, some school systems don't require anything at all. So I would definitely say first check with your administrators or your school board and make sure what the requirements are, because there may not be any. If you're having trouble as far as time goes, then maybe see if they can volunteer, things like Josh said, like judging a scholarship application online or doing something that's not one-on-one with the student. You could, as long as they're not alone with the student, a lot of times you can use volunteers, but as soon as you put them in a car with the student or they are in a room with them, maybe coaching a CDE team, then at that point you'll need to talk with administrators and make sure they're going through the proper steps. But you can fire a volunteer. So if they're doing something inappropriate or against the school or FFA code of conduct and you don't want them to be a part, it's okay as the ag educator to actually say, you know, thank you for all of your help, but we're going to go in a different direction, and you don't be afraid to use someone new and get someone else involved with that.
I think the other thing that I would say when you're talking about not being able to get clearance is, like Allie mentioned, how can you use that volunteer where they maybe don't have to have clearance? For example, in order to go and have lunch with my son, I have to watch a 10-minute anti-bullying video plus have a background check. But that's only because I need to go physically into the building and be with the students to do those in order to go in. But I could help the teacher by doing any kind of computer work or things from home where I'm not physically in contact with the students or in the building. So, for example, the video that the lady that is on the video that I shared with Dr. Foster that he may be able to show you after we're done is on the volunteer inventory resource. She actually called me up because she gave it to her students 2 days, 52 brand new volunteers came to her program. These forms came in and she started to call me to say, hey, now I've got to enter all of these. But then she goes, but just before I called you, I remembered it said data entry. And so I called up Susie's mom and said, hey, I see you're interested in doing data entry. Would you be willing to enter all of these volunteer inventories into an Excel document? And she said, yeah, if I have them to you by Friday, is that quick enough? And so those are things that she sends home with Susie. Susie's mom doesn't have to come into the building, and she just does that data entry. It could be another one, if you've got a volunteer that you need someone to run to the grocery store to get your lab supplies. Do you really need to be the one going to get the salt and the vanilla to make ice cream in your classroom? Or could someone else, anyone that can go to the grocery store, do that for you? Those are things where maybe a security clearance aren't required because they're not in contact or coming into the building. And so that's things that we would typically do on our free time that they would be able to do for you. The other thing that you would ask is, how do you have that difficult conversation? And I think it's really about just being upfront and honest, and that it's not you're not the one that's saying you can't, I don't want you to do this. It's just being very upfront and honest with them that according to the school resource officer, whoever did the clearance, that at this time we're unable to allow you to be in contact with the students because the security clearance has either not gone through or it came back and it didn't meet the school requirements. I really appreciate your support and your help, and would love to be able to find ways to get you to be able still to support, even if it's just being that advocate for your program and helping them understand how they can go out and share the great things that you're doing and just telling the story about the activities that you're doing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, my name is Hunter Kaufman. I am a wildlife fishery science major. So my question for you, kind of relating to background checks, clearances, things like that. What kind of precautions should you take when looking for volunteers? Like what kind of things should you be looking out for?
So I think one, like Miss Allie had said, is just making sure that whatever your program requirements are, whether at your school district or your county, whatever they require for volunteers, that you first of all understand what those policies are and that what they require. Because the one thing you never want to do is to get someone involved in a program or to encourage someone to be a part of it, and then find out later that you've not followed the rules of your employer or the county, the school district, whatever it is. I think the other thing is just to always make sure, rules of thumb, never allow someone to be alone with one individual student, and that's in yourself. And that's probably, I think as a teacher, that was one of the hardest things is coming home from an FFA contest and you would drive by a student's home, but it would have left you in the vehicle with one other student headed back to the school. And so you have to be like, my policy was that we just never dropped anyone off at home. So we never had to have those conversations about, the uncomfortable conversation of, I can't drop you off because now it'll just be me and one other student in the vehicle. And trying to explain that I know that you probably wouldn't say anything. And then you just get yourself into these really weird and uncomfortable conversations. So those, it's very difficult, I will admit, as a male teacher. A lot of times we have, especially in our leadership part of the FFA program, a lot of females that take on those positions. So then how do you position yourself to make sure that, again, you're never in a situation where it's just you and one other student, whether it's male or female, but specifically getting yourself into a small group of females. Go to an FFA conference and all you take are female students. You have to do room checks. Do you do it, or do you get another female advisor from another chapter to go in and do those room checks? And so it's just kind of keeping what we oftentimes think are common sense things, but a lot of times we also forget those. I think the other thing is if you have an uncomfortable feeling, go with your gut. And so if you've got someone that's really interested, but just seems like you just have this really uncomfortable feeling, always go with the uncomfortable feeling, because I would never want someone to get in the position of having that uncomfortable feeling, giving into it, and then afterwards regretting because something happened. And so as Allie said, you have the ability to fire a volunteer. You're the general manager. You're the one that's determining where your volunteers best fit. And so it's really up to you to determine how they're going to fit into your program. And just knowing, I had my very first convention was in Louisville, Kentucky. I ended up in a motel that had to pass the keys under a 1.5 inch thick plexiglass window. And just across the street from the motel was a local adult establishment. And we found my chaperone at 11 o'clock at night walking over to this adult entertainment establishment, and just was a really awkward and difficult thing. And we had to have that conversation and then let them know that they were no longer asked to be a volunteer within our program. And that was just unacceptable when we're around students. And really I led the conversation, as difficult as it was for a brand new teacher to do, was all about what does that look like to the students? What kind of message are you giving to the students? Whether it's right or wrong it wasn't about whether it was wrong for them to do. It was just the wrong time, the wrong place, and the wrong audience. And so what kind of message was that driving back to the future leaders that we were trying to build, that it was okay at a conference to go to an adult entertainment facility just because it was across the street from our motel?
Other questions? I saw a couple of you jump up last time. I know you're trying to document everything. You're doing a good job of that. You should be checking that out and adding contributing as well. Rose.
Hi, my name is Rose. I'm a junior in agricultural and extension education, and my question has to do with, so when you have parents who are involved in the FFA chapter because their student is a member, how do you continue on that partnership after their student graduates? Like, how do you keep them involved? Thank you.
So the first thing I would say is a lot of it's just communication, letting them know what's still going on. I will tell you that and you all know that as high school students, the last thing you probably ever did was took information home and gave it to mom and dad. It ended up in your locker. It ended up in a binder. You might have found it at the end of the year when locker cleanout was. So as an instructor, it's just how do you communicate to the parents and letting them know what the possibilities are, the opportunities that are out there. And then I always say is it's okay if someone doesn't continue. But don't just, typically the old alumni model was we only communicated with those people who paid dues. And so if they didn't pay dues the following year, what did we do? We quit communicating to them. Well, if I don't know what's going on, I can't ever volunteer to be a part of it. And so how do you just keep them in the loop and letting them know? And if you communicate with them for 2 years and they don't do anything, maybe after 2 years, they realize, hey, I really miss this, or I've got an expertise that I have now time to participate, and they'll come back. But if we quit communicating with them, then you've lost them, and you're not going to get them in. And it's okay. You know, that's one of the things that we've struggled with our seasoned alumni members that say we get them in as freshman parents, their son or daughter graduates, and they disappear. And my question to them is always and what does it hurt? And, you know, they kind of look at me like, well, they're not participating anymore. But we have freshmen coming in every single year. And so if we get 4 great years of support from them, then it's okay to let them go by the wayside or find, you know, maybe they don't have as much involvement. And how do we help them understand, though, that throughout their time, that they need to help recruit new incoming freshman parents to be a part of the program and not just, I'll do this, I'm going to do it all by myself for 4 years, but how do they help find the replacements and train new volunteers to take over their position? And then not just say, thank you for your 4 years, you're done, I'm going to write you off, but how do we just keep them in? And, you know, the cool thing is with today's technology, an email doesn't cost anything other than a couple seconds of your time to send it. So putting them on a distribution list and sending them out your monthly or quarterly or annual newsletter, whatever it may be, they at least see what you're still doing and how they could be a part of it. And then it's when it fits into their schedule to be able to come out and help, and really showing the impact that help is making, you'll get them to come back. So I have to run. I've got another meeting, but I'm going to leave Miss Alli with you. So thank you again for your time. I will get on and answer those questions that you had input into the document for you. And if there's ever anything else I can do or Miss Alli can do, please reach out to us. We are here to help you and to help our instructors. You are and our ag professionals. You are the future of the industry and the future of our programs. So we really want to be able to help you and support you wherever we can.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, guys. What other questions do you have for Alli right now? Those big picture things you want to get addressed. Yeah, Mason, come on.
Hi, I'm Macy. I'm a junior as an agriculture extension education major. So you always want to make sure you have volunteers that are willing to help and are always eager to help, but what do you do in situations where maybe a volunteer is getting overly helpful and kind of stepping on your toes as an advisor? How would you rein them back?
I think it's important to just have the conversation with them on the front end. One thing that we try to stress is sharing a program of activities with your alumni or your volunteers in the beginning of the year to say, these are the things that my chapter is doing. And a lot of times alumni will have their own POA, but making sure that you have that conversation of like, here's what I actually need you for. And I love your assistance and your help, but you know, these are the things that are going to drive our chapter forward and what we really need. and maybe you're real excited about this tractor pull that you want to put on, but it's not the direction I want to go in. So just making sure that you have that initial talk with them. A lot of advisors now don't even go to the alumni meetings, but I do encourage you to go at least once in the beginning of the year to share your calendar and your mission and vision for the year.
Great question. Okay. Are there any other questions for Allie before you have on that list that you want to make sure you get as you apply it?
Can I add one thing to Josh's last question?
Sure.
When we talked about losing the parents, one thing that not a lot of people have realized is starting this year, we have associate membership. So now any FFA member that graduates and their grade level is marked in the roster system will automatically be an associate alumni member for 5 years. So that's a whole new pool of people. Our alumni membership on the national level has gone from just over 60,000 to over 220,000 this year because of things like that, and also adding non-traditional chapters like John Deere, AGR, and that sort of thing. So also think about, you might not lose a parent if they think it's a time to get to share with their recent graduates. So maybe your graduates are new alumni members, but you'll keep the parents because they're coming back to be a young alumni member. So maybe you'll keep those parents because the recent graduate students are now being involved. So that's something that's an opportunity that a lot of the newer graduates don't know about yet. But I would encourage you as young teachers to get those graduates involved.
Hey, can I ask a point of clarification on that? Because I find that very intriguing. As we go to this roster system on my FFA or whatever, so that means that once I go in there and designate they've graduated, will it automatically talk to the alumni system? You're saying it'll move them over to your alumni roster.
That's correct.
That's pretty awesome. Well done. Okay, Evie.
Hi, my name is Evelyn Zaleski. I already asked one of the questions. So another question that I have is that I had trouble with my chapter in high school was, let's say you have a student who graduates who is a member of the FFA program but has a relationship with another student who is still in the FFA and the graduate would like to volunteer. How do you go about that? And I figured you would probably politely ask them not to participate in certain things, but I didn't know what the rules were to that. So just if there could be clarification on that. Thank you.
I think that it's okay to have them involved, and even if they, are in a relationship with the student, but I would not encourage you to have them as a chaperone or anything like that where it's an overnight trip. And then just to also make sure you have that conversation of professionalism. Your other alumni members aren't doing that, so even though they're a younger alumni, they don't need to, show PDA or anything like that. But I think it's fine to keep them involved. They're going to be there, but definitely not let them chaperone anything overnight. And it's a pretty good rule of thumb to just say until you're at the college graduate age, you probably don't need to be, maybe make it 21. That you're not a chaperone overnight of something, that you can give back in other ways like CDE coach or helping fill out record books or something like that. But just kind of setting your own bar of at what point or age level that a student can actually chaperone.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, any more questions, or are we going to let Allie off the hook? Oh, one more here. Very good.
Okay, so my name is Rose. My question is just kind of what has been the most rewarding experience you have experienced when working with the community when you were a teacher?
I think it's just having them involved. The school that I taught at was one of 7 high schools in the county that all had FFA programs, and ours was the newest school. And was actually in a city that had 2 other schools in it. So our struggle was just finding people that wanted to get involved. But once we did, it was really rewarding to me. And I actually had one of our farm credit representatives that lived right down the road. He didn't have a student in school, but knew that he would. And it was rewarding to me to be involved with him and have him come out to the alumni meetings and want to be involved, even though we had all these other options for him of established chapters. But he came, and one of the things that was really neat, we had a Thanksgiving meat sale, so turkeys and hams and that sort of thing, and we had several extra. And he came in and just said, "What do you have left?" and wrote a check for it. And then at our banquet, he actually said, how much money are you giving away in scholarships? And I told him, and he said, well, I'll match it. And again, it's just finding people in your community and not being afraid to ask and get them involved, even if they don't have a student or they weren't a graduate. But he knew that there was buy-in there because he had children that were eventually going to go to that high school and wanted that program to succeed and grow. So just making sure that you ask, and that was rewarding to me. And then also, as I went on to be regional and state staff, I got to continue to work with him as a state sponsor. So you never know who the people in the community are that are going to end up continuing to work with you wherever your career may end up. So that was rewarding for me, along with just seeing the students succeed and knowing that one of my chapter presidents that I worked with my first year teaching, she graduated my first year. She was the one that actually started the alumni chapter. So knowing that the work that you did doesn't just stop when they graduate, that they want to come back and give back in college too.
Very good. Hey, Ms. Ellis, thank you so much. I have been extremely impressed with the innovation that y'all shared. It makes me very excited, and I appreciate all your hard work and effort. So thanks for logging on with us. And if I heard correctly, are you and Josh going to be able to go back to that Google Doc and the questions we couldn't get to or not add clarity to them?
Sure. Yeah.
Hey, that's awesome. This makes a neat way as we try to explore different learning tools to make these online meetings as powerful and as purposeful as possible.
Yes, thank you for involving us.
So thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause for Ms. Ellis. And we'll see you down the trail.
All right, thank you.
Bye.